Okay, so please look for the flag, wave them down, and we'll answer your question.
Is welfare reform any part of your economic restructuring?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, it's not just welfare reform. Let me tell you what I believe. I actually think you need a safety net in order for free enterprise to survive. But it can't be a lifestyle. It cannot become a way of life. My biggest problem with our safety net programs in America today is they don't cure poverty. Imagine if today, God forbid, you broke your arm. And you go to the emergency room and say, I just broke my arm, and the doctor says, oh, that's so bad. Here's a lifetime prescription for Tylenol 3 or whatever. And you'd look at them like they're crazy. Well, that's what our safety net programs have become. They don't cure poverty. They deal with the symptoms of poverty and the pain of poverty. They don't cure it. So we do need a safety net. But you need to also ensure that we are helping people cure poverty. And what cures poverty? Unless you're permanently disabled, what cures poverty? A good paying job. That's exactly right. And so my argument is you are never going to get programs that cure poverty out of the federal government. And so I would take our safety net programs, put them into what's called the Flex Fund, and turn them over to states and local communities so they can design programs that work. And the only condition is if you are receiving public assistance, you must either be working or going to school. So you can acquire the skills and the habits you need to acquire a good paying job and never have to rely on the safety net again. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you're going to hold it. Okay. Yeah, my husband and I are self-employed. This is an Obamacare question.
I'm against Obamacare. That's just on the record. Okay.
Okay. I just want to tell my story real quickly. So as
Yes,
such, we had to go on Obamacare. We do not qualify for any subsidies. Our premium went from $400 a month to $1,500 a month because we are in our 60s, but we are not old enough to be on Medicare yet.
And your deductible and co-payments are?
Went from $1,000 per person per year to $5,000. We went from a 20% copay to a 30% copay.
What a disaster.
A disaster. That's my story. Right, and I have to say, I get very angry when I see all the people who are retired because they have a lot of money in the bank, don't have any income, and they're getting subsidized insurance, and I'm paying for them. I'm so happy to do that. So here's my two-part question for you. Why has Congress not done anything in the last 4.5 years about it, or had they tried, and why did they fail? And why do you think you as president can do something about it?
So the couple quote, and that's a good question. The first is, in fairness, the House, I think, has voted over 50 times to repeal it, but it's going to be hard to get Obama to sign a law that repeals Obamacare. But the process, I don't want to get into the Senate talk because, quite frankly, it's confusing but you all are familiar with the process of reconciliation, which is the process by which they pass this. There will be an effort here in the next 10 days to repeal large portions of Obamacare using that process by a simple majority vote. Will the president still veto it? Probably. The difference is when I'm president, I'll sign it. And so we need to begin to lay the groundwork for the American people to see that we're going to get rid of Obamacare, but we're also going to replace it with something that's very straightforward, and that is you will now be allowed access to your own pre-tax money. In your case, it would probably be a tax credit, refundable, that you will be able to use to buy the kind of health insurance you want from any company in America that will sell it to you. The result of that will be competition in the private sector for your business. You know how they're going to compete for your business? Better prices, better quality. And if you don't believe me, I'm not saying it's exactly identical, but watch television tonight for any length of time. I promise you, you will see an advertisement for either Liberty Mutual, the General, State Farm, Prudential, Allstate, Geico, Progressive. Why will you see? He likes those companies. He's already clapping, see? Why are they fighting so hard? Why do they do so much advertising for your auto insurance business? Because who controls your auto insurance purchases? Does your employer control it? Does the government control it? You control it. And so now there are going to be hundreds of millions of Americans that control their own health care purchases. And the private sector will respond to that by creating products to attract your business. And they compete with each other on the benefit, on prices and on quality. And by the way, not everybody wants the same kind of health insurance. My 28-year-old single brother-in-law thinks he's never going to die. So what he needs is a health savings account for out-of-pocket expenses for the flu or a hangover, and then a hospitalization plan if, God forbid, something bad happened, right? I am a married father of 4. I need more comprehensive coverage. But we don't have those choices. Obamacare says everyone must buy the same kind of plan or nothing at all. We have no competition, no choice, no innovation, and the result is what you're facing. And by the way, people on the subsidized plans are facing the same thing. They call my office. Hey, I have Obamacare. I just got a $3,000 bill from the hospital. I said, well, what's your deductible? $5,000. I said, well, congratulations. That's why. because Obamacare has high deductibles and high co-payments. You're in essence not insured until you come up with thousands of dollars out of your pocket. It's a disaster at every level, a disaster. So I hope we'll take efforts to do it now, and ultimately when I'm president, we'll pass it through the same process and I'll sign the repeal. You got to wave at the people with the flags.
There we go. I
got
got it. Oh, thank you. Hey, Senator Rubio.
Yeah.
You've missed more votes than Senators Paul, Cruz, and Sanders.
Oh, yeah, I heard that the other night at the debate, yeah.
I mean, given that you're not running for re-election to the Senate next year, given that, you know, that seat's not going to be a bed of roses to hold.
He's reading from a script, too. That's always good.
Why not just resign from the Senate, let a replacement hit the ground running, eliminate this distraction, and go completely all in with your presidential campaign?
Okay.
I don't see why staying in the I don't see how staying in the Senate's helping you any.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's not a distraction for me. My office every single day helps people with their needs in Florida, which is the most important thing a senator does, is deal with people like the veteran that came to my office missing both of his legs because he had been injured overseas in the service of our country and had to fight with the government to convince them that he was actually disabled. Or the elderly couple that had their identity stolen in a tax fraud. Or the widow that was fighting for her widow benefits, her survivor benefits, and couldn't get Social Security to pay attention. And our office worked on their behalf. Oftentimes I have to make phone calls on their behalf, and I'm going to continue to do that kind of work until my last day in office. The second thing I would say is that the truth of the matter is that while I don't actually hate being in the Senate, I'm frustrated by the Senate. It is a frustrating place because we're not making progress on any major issues. But I realize, it didn't take me long to realize this country cannot change direction without the right president. And that's why I'm running for president. So I'm going to continue my service to the people of Florida, but I am going to run for president because we cannot change the direction of this country unless we change the occupant in the White House. And I intend to do that. And I intend to be in New Hampshire quite a bit in the hopes to earn your support.
Way in the back.
Okay.
Senator Rubio.
Yes, sir.
My name is Augustin, and I'm actually, I come from a family of immigrants, much like yourself. At age 7, my dad, a college professor, an engineer, moved here. We didn't speak a word of English. You know, did everything the right way. That's our family philosophy today. You know, went everywhere from visas to permanent residency and all the way to citizenship, costing us, you know, years and thousands of dollars, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. So my question for you is, you know, what is your plan to simplify that process?
Well, it's not just simplify. We have to change its criteria. Let me tell you about. Let me first begin by telling you how we're not going to solve immigration, and that is through a massive piece of legislation. There is no way to deal with immigration comprehensively in a massive piece of legislation. Trust me, there is no way. So the only way forward is through a 3-step process. Step number 1 is we must bring illegal immigration under control, and we know how to do that. It's not rocket science how to do that. There are 3 main corridors which people cross the southern border across, and we need more walling there, but also more personnel. You need a mandatory E-Verify system. You need an entry-exit tracking system to prevent and track people that have overstayed visas, because that's 40% of the problem. If you do that and you're serious about it, you will bring illegal immigration under control. And we can't do anything else until we prove to the American people that illegal immigration is under control. Once you've done that, step 2 is we have to modernize our legal immigration system. Let me explain to you about our legal immigration system. A lot of people still don't realize this. It is by far the most generous program on the planet. 1 million people a year come to the United States every year legally, permanently, to become citizens. 1 million a year. No other country even comes close. Despite that, you still have 250,000 people on top of that coming illegally. 1 million people. Here's the problem. They come primarily on the basis of whether or not they have a relative living here. And my argument is that in the 21st century, it can't be about that anymore. It has to be merit-based. In the 21st century, immigration has to be based on what skills do you have? What are you going to contribute? In the case of your family, your father was a professional and a professor, right? And that's why he came to the United States to be a part of that. It's not about discrimination. It's the reality that in the 21st century, our economy is fundamentally different than it once was. And we have to have a merit-based system of immigration that, you're right, isn't as bureaucratic. It doesn't require you to hire, you know, thousands of dollars of lawyers in order to navigate it, but it has to be family-based. After we've done those 2 things, I think people are going to be reasonable about what you do with people that are here illegally, that are not criminals, that didn't come just yesterday. If you're a criminal, you're going to be deported. But we can't even get to that third stage until we've done those other two things. And I'm glad you raised the last point. Because, guys, for me, immigration is not something I read about in the news. I live this thing every day. My family, my wife's entire family are immigrants. My family are immigrants. All of my neighbors are either immigrants or first generation. I see every aspect of this. The sad, the good, the bad, the ugly. I see it all. It is a complicated issue. And no one can argue that I'm not compassionate towards immigrants, because I am. I know heartbreaking stories. You probably do too. I also know we're a sovereign country. Every nation on earth has immigration laws and they enforce them. And I also know this, and this is something that never gets reported. One of the leading immigration calls to my office are not from people that are here illegally. It's from people who have a relative that's been trying to come legally for 14 years. And they paid their fees and they've waited in line, and they want to understand, why is someone who did it the wrong way going to come cheaper and faster than someone who's trying to do it the right way? This is a complicated issue, but it has to be dealt with. Otherwise, this issue will continue to linger. It will continue to hurt our country. It isn't good for anyone. It's been lingering now for 30 years. And if the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to solve. But this is the only way forward. Anyone who says you can do it all at once in a comprehensive bill is just not being truthful. It's not being honest. It just isn't possible, and it isn't the right way to do it now.
Hi, Senator. I'm a huge proponent of tolerance and diversity. However, I'm also concerned about our inability these days to really tolerate all viewpoints and to respect free speech and religious rights. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that religious liberty is not just the right to believe whatever you want. It's also the right to exercise your beliefs, not just at home, but in your life, in your business, and so forth. And it is a fundamental right that all Americans have. And as president, we're going to have a Justice Department that protects the rights of all people, including those who hold traditional values and want to live them out in their business and in their homes and in their lives. We're also not going to tolerate people at the IRS targeting people because of their because of their political views. I'll tell you this now, okay? If I am president of the United States and the head of the IRS or someone in the IRS is caught targeting liberal groups for auditing, they will go to jail. That's what Barack Obama should have done now when these people were caught at the IRS targeting conservative groups. And I would add one more point. This never gets talked about enough. The most important institution in the society is not the government. It's not even the business community. It's the family. The family is the first school. The family is the most important government, and I'm going to tell you why it's so important. Because I don't care how many diplomas you have on the wall. You can't succeed without the right values. There is no one that is born with the right values. No one. Values are taught to you by what your parents do and by what they say. If you don't have strong families, that breaks down, and ultimately it breaks down your society. And so you wonder, why is this a country that has violent crime? Why is this a country that has all these terrible tragedies where people are being shot and killed? Why is this a country that has all these things that are going on, social economic conflicts that we have? It's because the American family is in distress. So government can't make people better fathers or mothers, or better husbands and wives, but we shouldn't have any policies that are anti-family. And we shouldn't undermine those groups in society that strengthen and give the family assistance. And the faith community in this country helps instill values and reinforce those values. Hard work, discipline, self-control, respect for others, the value of human life. These are important values, and we lose them when the family breaks down and the institutions that support them break down.
Thank you. Hello, Senator.
Nice Yankee cap.
Yes.
He's a huge, guys, he's a great part of our campaign.
Yeah,
we're going to excuse that, right?
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And his credit, he wears it everywhere he goes. This guy's pretty brave.
I
you know?
do. I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator, and welcome again to Nashua.
Thank you.
And my question has to do somewhat with judicial appointments, Supreme Court justices, but also what happens when the Supreme Court reaches decisions that are far afield from anything we would see in the Constitution itself. We've seen it many times. I could cite, probably just as well as you can, number of times that the justices just in the last 5 years have come up with decisions that seem to make no constitutional sense. So my first question is, what would be a criteria you're going to be using for judicial appointments?
Yeah.
And what happens if the court does decide things that way that have no relevance to the Constitution?
Well, that's a problem, because then you run into this constitutional crisis between the judiciary and the legislative and executive branch that we want to avoid. The good news is the next president's going to probably have a number of appointments to the Supreme Court. So let me back up for a second. It's a little bit of a long answer, but I want to give it to you because I want to go in depth on this issue. It's really important. One of the most important things a president does, whoever the next president appoints to the Supreme Court is going to be there long after they're gone out of office. Okay? So this is an important issue. So you may not know this, but I am a recovering lawyer. In law school, no matter where you go, lawyers are taught to examine the facts of a case and turn them in the favor of your client, whatever that may be. And that's what's happening in the Supreme Court. You have people on the Supreme Court that are also lawyers, and they're deciding, this is what I want the outcome to be. I want the outcome to be that Obamacare is legal. I want the outcome to be X, Y, or Z. And I am going to figure out how to manipulate creatively the Constitution to reach the conclusion that I want to reach. I will not appoint people like that. I will appoint people that have a history and a record of being strict constructionists, who understand that the Constitution is not a living and breathing document. It is a document of limitation. You can change the Constitution through a constitutional amendment, not through the court system, not through the legislative branch. And the Supreme Court is a document, the Constitution is a document of limitation. It doesn't grant the federal government power. It limits the federal government's powers. So we are going to appoint people to the Supreme Court that have shown a history and a tendency and a consistency in understanding that the role of the Supreme Court is not to create law, it's not to manipulate the Constitution, it is to apply it strictly to the issue before them. To apply the Constitution, not to manipulate it. That's what we're appointing, not just to the Supreme Court, but to all federal courts at every level.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Senator Rubio. I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier in your speech that you wanted to reduce the stigma associated with getting jobs in industry. My question to you would be, how do you plan on bringing industry back to America? As it currently is, a lot of industries or jobs are overseas. They're not here.
Right. So a lot of it is being driven by our own policies. Number one, we have the highest combined corporate tax rate in the world, which is why you see these inversions. Companies are deciding, we're going to put our headquarters in Ireland or New Zealand or Canada. Number two, we have a very burdensome regulatory system that imposes additional costs on doing business in America. Number three is we're costing ourselves capital. We have $2 trillion of American corporate cash sitting in overseas bank accounts. How does that happen? Apple or some other company makes a lot of money in Germany, and instead of bringing that money back and investing it here, they leave it there. You know why they leave it there? Because when you make money in Germany, they pay the German tax. And if they bring that money back to America, they have to pay a second tax on it. $2 trillion of that kind of money. You know what $2 trillion is? It is equivalent to the size of the entire Russian economy. That is what $2 trillion is. So we need to move to a territorial system of taxation that says if you've made a profit overseas, you pay taxes overseas. And then you bring whatever's left over back to America tax-free. Every other industrialized country does it that way except us. And so it surprises us that this money's sitting overseas. So that's why it's so important to have regulatory reform, tax reform, a territorial system of taxation that makes America a competitive place in comparison to the rest of the world. Today, our government policies are putting us at a competitive disadvantage. Other nations have figured this out. They are actively recruiting companies to take their jobs and their businesses away from us. Not because they don't like America, but because the American government is incentivizing them to do it. We have to stop doing that. If we can just even that playing field, we can compete with anyone in the world. And my last point, this is why I'm such a supporter of natural gas. Natural gas is going to help not just lower the cost of living, it's going to lower the cost of manufacturing. One of the biggest costs that a manufacturer faces is the cost of energy. If you can lower the cost of energy for a manufacturing, we become competitive again. We already have the best workers in the world. If you can lower the price of energy, we can have a manufacturing renaissance. We can once again become an economy that makes things. And we need to be an economy that makes things, not just an economy that does things and sells things, but also an economy that makes things. And if we can do all these things, there is no nation on earth that will be able to compete with us.
welcome to New Hampshire, Senator.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
I wanted
Why are the
to-
leaves still on the tree? I'm just waiting.
Aren't they beautiful?
That's a big deal for a Floridian. There's always leaves on our trees.
I wanted to thank you very much for your support of the anti-incitement and anti-Semitism bill that is right now in the Senate, along with Senator Ayott's support as well. Could you explain more about what this bill is about, and what do you think the most effective way we can work as a country to stop that incitement and stop the killing and move toward peace in the Middle East?
We're funding the Palestinian Authority. We're funding these so-called governmental entities that are inciting violence, openly inciting violence. And you have John Kerry going to the Middle East saying, well, both sides are to blame. You've both done something here. That's not true. This is a one-sided issue. By the way, we should be firmly on Israel's side on this issue, and this administration is not. Guys, it's heartbreaking. I've actually, I've been to Judea and Samaria. I've seen the conditions that Palestinians are living in. That's imposed on them by their own authorities, not by the Israelis. That's imposed on them, and in Gaza, it's even worse, by Hamas. That's imposed on them by their own leaders. Leaders that teach children from the earliest of age that it is a glorious thing to kill Jews. What do you expect you're going to get 20 years later when you're teaching children in their cartoons to kill Jews is a glorious thing? And then you've got so-called leaders that are inciting violence, that are talking about, glorious bloodlettings and what a glorious thing it would be to kill more Jews. This is an outrage. And then we're funding this stuff. And then we have a White House that's implied that they may not use their veto authority at the United Nations Security Council to impede this unilateral effort to create a Palestinian state. So it goes back to the point I made on the state of Israel. It is in our national security interest to support Israel, because it is the only pro-American free enterprise democracy in the world. But we also have a moral obligation. Israel was a nation created for a very specific purpose, and that is to serve for a homeland for the Jewish people in the aftermath of the Holocaust. So never again would there not be somewhere on earth that they could go to flee oppression and persecution. And the result has been a miracle. A nation that still is now starting to develop, but has never really had significant natural gas or oil or other things, has built a world-class 21st century free enterprise economy on innovation. And it is the strongest ally America has in international forums. And you know the only thing they ask of America? They don't ask us to send soldiers to fight for them. They don't ask us to conduct airstrikes on their behalf. They ask two things. Number one, to support their right to exist as a Jewish state. And number two, if they run out of weapons, bullets, or ammunition, to resupply them. They'll pay for it. That's all they ask. And for the first time, I think, in my lifetime, there's doubt about both of those because of this administration.
Thank you. I'm getting a little tired of the federal government blackmailing each state with monies, whether it be education or whatever. How? Now, I've heard what and why from all the candidates, but I want to hear specifically how you are going to get the senators and congressmen off their butts and actually doing something. Anything would be nice.
Well, I mean, what... It's interesting. I was talking to, a few days ago, I was talking to Governor Walker on an unrelated item, and we were talking about state government, because I was the Speaker of the House in Florida until 2008. And I recollect going back, about a third of our work was dealing with something the federal government was trying to force us to do. And that's a real burden on states. So part of it is shrinking the scope and size of the federal government. Part of it is putting an end to these, devolving more power to the states. I talked about one example. The safety net programs, turning them over to the states and local communities so they can design innovative ways to do it. Get the federal government out of K through 12 education. It's one of the reasons why I oppose Common Core. Okay? Because I'm in favor of curriculum reform. I want our curriculum to be top-notch, but I think that should be driven at the local level, not at the federal level, for two reasons. Number one, if you don't like the curriculum, you can go to your school board and complain, or your state legislator and complain. But you're not going to go to the Department of Education in Washington and complain. No one will see you. So, and the second reason is it is never a suggestion with the federal government. It'll start out as a suggestion. This is what we think you should do with your schools. It will end in a mandate. This is what you must do with your schools if you want our money. If you want our money for school lunches, you've got to serve more of the kind of food that we like. If you want more money for your curriculum, you've got to do the kind of curriculum we want. And so that's why I honestly believe the Department of we don't need a Department of Education. We don't need